Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're digging into the science behind one of our most profound experiences, belief. We're going to look at how our brains are literally, physically wired to create, maintain, and even defend our deepest convictions. You know, we usually think of belief as this abstract thing, right? A choice we make with our conscious mind. But what if it's deeper than that? What if it's more hardwired into us than we realize? Today, we're going under the hood to check out the brain's internal wiring and really uncover the mechanics of belief itself. How does our biology actually shape what we hold to be true? All right, so let's start with the basic building blocks. The source material calls these the brain's generative modules, and you can just think of them as the pre-installed software our brains use to automatically start building beliefs right out of the box. Okay, so the first tool in the kit is this thing with a fantastic name, HAD, the Hyperactive Agency Detection Device. And hyperactive is really the word to focus on here. It's this ancient survival mechanism that basically primes us to see intention and purpose, well, everywhere. You hear a rustle in the bushes, your brain's first thought isn't wind, it's predator. It's a system that's built to err on the side of caution, even if that means being a little bit jumpy. A good way to think of it is like an oversensitive smoke detector, but instead of smoke, it's looking for invisible agents. The idea is, it's way better to have a few false alarms, thinking the wind is a lion, than to miss one real fire. And the source material even links this tendency to specific genes, like CHRAN7, suggesting this is the cognitive leap that gets us to create concepts like spirits or gods to explain all the unseen forces around us. And this is where it gets really wild. Our other mental tools get in on the action. We've got this thing called a theory of mind, which is just our ability to guess what other people are thinking and feeling. So what does our brain do? It takes that social tool and just applies it to those invisible agents it just invented. It's amazing. Brain scans actually show that when people pray, the parts of the brain that light up are the exact same ones we use when we're just having a chat with a friend. And this whole idea gets a boost from something called intuitive dualism. It seems like our brain has two totally separate processing systems running. One is for minds. It deals with stuff like intentions and beliefs, and the other is for physical objects, things that follow the laws of physics. Because of that natural split, the idea of a soul or a consciousness existing completely separate from the physical body just feels, it feels totally natural to us.
Okay, so our brains are natural belief-building machines. But that brings up a huge question, right? If our brains are so good at making beliefs, why are those beliefs so incredibly hard to change, even when we see evidence that flat out contradicts them? Well, that leads us right into our next section, the brain's powerful defense system for its own ideas.
So it turns out, the brain isn't just passively watching the world go by. It's a prediction machine. It's constantly building a model of reality and trying to guess what's going to happen next. Now, inside that model, a really strong core belief, say a religious or political one, can become what neuroscientists call a hyper-prior. Think of it like the master prediction, the ultimate explanation that helps the brain make sense of all the chaotic, messy data that life is constantly throwing at it. And this little flowchart here shows you exactly how it works. Once that hyper-prior is locked in, the brain uses it to predict and explain everything. But then, what happens when it runs into info that just doesn't fit the model? Well, it has a choice. To actually change a core belief would be like trying to rewrite your computer's entire operating system while it's running. It could cause a massive system failure. So, to protect its model and avoid that cognitive crash, the brain often takes the easy way out. It just writes off the new information as random, irrelevant noise. It's not a bug in the system, it's a feature of this predictive firewall. But what happens when the brain's physical hardware, the wetware, starts to have problems? This is where modern neuroscience throws a real challenge at those powerful intuitions our brains work so hard to build and protect. So let's take a really powerful and common intuition, one we kind of touched on before. This idea that our morality, our deep sense of right and wrong, is part of some non-physical, untouchable soul, something pure and totally separate from our messy physical bodies. But then you look at neurodegenerative diseases, and they present a pretty stark challenge to that idea. Conditions like frontotemporal dementia, which cause actual physical decay in the brain, can completely change and sometimes even dismantle a person's moral compass. This really suggests that morality isn't so separate after all. It seems to be deeply, deeply rooted in our physical hardware. And the same kind of challenge applies to that feeling we all have of being a single, unified self. We just feel like one person, one consciousness, looking out at the world from a single command center. But this is where the neurological evidence really starts to chip away at that feeling. Take split brain research. It shows that our sense of being a single consciousness literally depends on the physical nerve fibers connecting our brain's two halves. If you cut them, you can end up with two separate streams of consciousness in one head. And even those profound spiritual experiences, like feeling you're outside your own body, can be artificially triggered just by stimulating one specific spot in the brain, the temporal parietal junction. The takeaway here is pretty hard to avoid. Our deepest sense of self seems to be tied directly to the functioning of some very specific and very physical hardware.
So all of this kind of points to a pretty profound conclusion, and it leaves us with a huge final question. If our very ability to believe, our tendency to see agents everywhere, to build these complex models of the world, and to defend them so fiercely, is a built-in feature of our neural hardware, a product of evolution, then what does that really mean for the beliefs themselves? For the software that we're all running on that hardware. It's a fascinating and maybe a little unsettling look at what it means to be human, right down to the very circuits and cells that make us who we are.